Amnesty International is a global movement that's demanding human rights for all people, no matter who they are or where they are. Gun-related violence threatens our most fundamental human right to life, and the organization now campaigns for governments to use common sense gun reform to stop gun violence and protect people's right to life. Joining us to discuss more is Amnesty International's USA Director of the Gun Violence Prevention, Ernest Coverson. And Ernest, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Well, I'll start off with the obvious that as we look around, we continue to see gun violence continue to rise, and the stories continue to be more harrowing. We see whether it's a mass shooting at a school, whether it's a young person that goes on the wrong doorstep, or whether it's just a random everyday
Yeah.
act of violence. We're seeing more and more people lose their life to gun violence. As a person who's got there on the battlefield, give me your perspective on where do you see things right now?
Right now, right, gun violence is consistently, since the pandemic, consistently been on the rise. We have seen the rise of gun sales, the rise of gun ammunition sales being up, and the rise of mass shootings, as you stated. And so, what's unfortunate is that we cannot get legislators to put common sense legislation on the books, even though many Americans overwhelmingly are in support of some of the common sense of background checks, of banning assault weapons, etc. But the elected officials that are there to represent these individuals are not representing them when it comes to the laws that they're passing. We have consistently seen the usage of these military style weapons in these shootings that have are taking place. And then we see as well these laws in states. Many times we look at federal conversations, but individual states is where the rubber is hitting the road. You just had Governor DeSantis sign a piece of legislation in Florida that will provide permitless carry concealed weapons in the state of Florida, meaning an individual can purchase a weapon without a license and carry it without anyone knowing. And that's taking place in states across the country. And so, as you know, many eyes are on the federal government. Our state governments are doing some ridiculous things that are allowing guns to continue to fill our communities and bring harm to individuals.
You touched on it because I think so many people have it wrong that when we talk about government, we talk about the federal government, and there is a requirement and there is things that the federal government can be doing. But most of the time we talk about what's happening, we have to take a look at state laws because state laws are really the difference makers.
Right.
New York State, we know, has some real stringent laws. We're considered to be one of the more stringent ones when it comes to having laws against gun violence. Recently, we had the whole Glock gun and the ghost gun legislation. But
Right.
when you talk about looking across the state or states, we got some work to do. Give me more of how you're interacting in terms of education, awareness, and even
Mhm.
advocacy in this area. Because, as we said, it is a national problem, but if it's really going to be conquered, I honestly believe you got to go at the state level first.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. People look at the federal government as the answer many times, but not only in the gun work, but in everything. The state is those local laws is what's affecting us on our day-to-day lives, right? And so, you know, we have as Amnesty and working with coalitions across states are looking to either support legislation as we were able to do this year in Michigan, that passed legislation, background checks, safe storage, and still working on ERPO or red flag laws in Michigan. And coalitions, organizations on the ground work to stop legislation, like in a Florida. I mean, unfortunately we were not able to, in a Georgia and others that are allowing these states. And we don't want to look at Amnesty as a nonpartisan organization. But you have to look at the reality. Many of these state legislatures are run by or controlled by Republicans. And so once they're in office, they move the legislation that they want to move. And this many times in support of firearms, and allowing more people access to firearms. And so we as an organization and coalitions in these states need the people in these states to stand up and push back. Like you say, we do educating. We work with organizations. We work with groups. We work with what we call our heroes, that are on the ground doing this work day to day. Even through COVID life, they were still going to hospitals. They were still intervening in community altercations, etc. But we have to push the legislation to be there to help stop the permission of these guns to be there. And lastly on that, like in Illinois, I live in outside of Chicago, and just like New York, Chicago or the state of Illinois has strong and strict gun laws. But you have a state next to us, Indiana, that has laxed gun laws. And so guns are permitted to cross state lines, etc. And so we have to deal with the state by state work so that everyone can be safe from this human rights crisis that we know is gun violence.
You talk about Chicago, and everybody knows that Chicago has definitely been stereotyped, and rightfully so in some
Yeah.
ways because of what goes on. We know that there's a lot of things that happen, but let me ask the question, because the question always comes back to the sentiments of the community. Because if you're ever really going to have any state change, it requires people going to a ballot box, or people showing up in protest, and people really making their voice heard. In a place like right there by Chicago, talk to me about, the voice of the people. How big is the voice of the people on particular issues like this? Because if you look, people will make the assumption that because this keeps happening, that nobody's really doing anything or saying anything, when the reality is that's just not the case.
Correct. It totally is not the case. You have, from young people, there's a group I work with, two groups I work with, one Good Kids Mad City, as well as Brave Youth Leaders, that are young people that are on the ground in their communities doing activities, educating, walking the streets, protesting, and then also getting involved in the political process as well to stop guns. But right, they don't get that top of the fold 6 o'clock news coverage that the shooting gets. And so there are individuals in communities in Chicago and across the country that are doing the work every day, pushing to get this work done. And as you were stating, there's layers to gun violence, and especially in our communities. In black and brown communities, there's layers to this. It's not just the point that there's the gun, which is number one, but there's also an issue of the education or the challenge in education. There's the issue with the challenge of job or employment opportunities. There's the challenge of food deserts. And so all of those pieces lead to the end result, which is the gun violence. And so we have to also get out of the silos. And if I'm working on gun violence, I need to talk and work with the folks that's working on educational issues. If I'm working on gun violence, I need to work and talk with the people that's working on environmental justice issues, that's got lead in the water, that's now impairing the individuals that's 7, 18 years old, that's drinking the water. It's impairing their mental growth. And so now they end up turning to a gun situation. And so we have to break those silos down and work, because unless we deal with all of those pieces of the puzzle in our communities, we're going to continue to have this gun violence issue. And so we have to deal with all of those at the same time that we push our legislators to pass legislation, don't allow these states to do this ridiculous stuff at the same time.
I want to get your take. I mean, you can go to Walmart right now, and in certain parts of the country, and be able, he knows where I'm going. You can go to Walmart right now and really walk out of there with a gun and ammunition. And, somebody will say, well, that's really, that's is what it should be. It's the right. It's the right. But what about a Walmart? We can have some restrictions, and what can be done to really deal and curb with this, because we remember there was somebody who was shot to death in Walmart. couple of times, you know,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and so right there, carrying the firearm. So when I think about Walmart, I think about other places where there's like easy access and things of that nature. I think about what can be done by the everyday public right now to really
Hmm.
deal with this because uh, nobody wants to deal with it until it comes to their door.
Yeah, and that's the unfortunate piece. And not only gun violence, that happens with a lot of a lot of pieces, a lot of public issues. Folks really don't look at it until it comes to their door, and so we need folks to really look at this because I would guesstimate there's a number of people somehow gun violence has affected you and or your family and or friends, and so you have some skin in the game at that point. But though those institutions, you spoke of Walmart and other sporting places, and even gun shows. But these establishments that are in our communities that's selling guns, we as the consumer have to say, we don't want you selling these in our community. We have to step up and say because after one of the school shootings, unfortunately, there's been so many I can't remember which one. One of the mass shootings, I think it was the Vegas shooting, if I'm not mistaken. Um, Walmart, some of the Walmarts did stop selling guns at their locations, at their stores. Some still did. I believe, many in the South still do. But some of the other locations did stop selling firearms in their stores. So they have the ability to stop and still flourish. But we have to demand what we want in our community, or what we're not going to allow in our communities when it comes to these retail shops, et cetera. And so we have to, take the stance. This is not a sprint. This is a marathon. You know, Many times you see the uproar, the excitement, quote unquote, when there is a shooting, and then 2 weeks later, after the funeral, after the balloons have been released, many folks go back to their daily lives, and until something else happens. But we have to consistently be in this fight to change what's happening right now.
Yeah, I think when we talk about this fight, it's a fight that's going to continue for a long, long time, and very many ways. Excuse me, tongue tied here today. Very many ways, an uphill battle, simply
Yeah.
because of a, I think a lack of complacency or a strong sense of complacency on the part of elected officials in Washington D.C. But I think also, when we talk about laws in the state. Um, there is some need for reform, of course, but I don't think that people want to even have this kind of reform because I don't think, in some senses, people don't get a sense of how bad it is. And when I
Yeah.
say that from the perspective that, I've got some friends that are across the Atlantic Ocean, and they look at America and they look at what's going on in our cities and our countries, and they're saying, "What is going on in your USA? What is going on here in America?" Because some of the stuff we would never have ever have here. But in the United States, we've allowed the law of the land to dictate that it's okay to have another mass shooting and we not be traumatized by it.
Right, right, yeah, and no, you're right, and I too as well. With working with the Amnesty International, especially after a mass shooting, I get the calls from colleagues over there, and even media, asking, what's going on, trying to understand our infatuation as a country with firearms, and what can they do, how can they support, how can they push back? Would it be beneficial if they and citizens of their countries, you know, write in, call in, and be active and help trying to save, quote unquote, us as a country with this infatuation with our firearms. And I have to say, Amnesty International is not against the Second Amendment, right? We're not saying to remove the Second Amendment. It is the law of the land. But at the same time, we have to just have common sense legislation with that. And you would think that even just as most recently, the 3 9-year-olds that were shot and killed in Nashville, that immediately our elected officials would look to see how to secure and save and keep young people safe at that point. But it didn't happen. Many are saying we need more guns. Teachers need to have guns now. There's been some laws that passed over the past 3 to 5 years to allow firearms on campuses and allow students to carry firearms on campus. And we all know on a college campus at 18 to 20 years old, 21 years old, what we were doing and how things happen on the campus. But now you're going to allow a student to carry a firearm as well on a campus. You're going to give a fifth grade teacher a Glock 9mm along with an apple when she come to class. So, instead of how do we reduce guns, many of the gun advocates was looking to say we need to increase individuals and individuals that have guns and have access to guns, which in my opinion is totally backwards at the same time.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, I just want to get a chance to get our viewers a little bit more acquainted with how they can get in touch with you guys and the work that you're doing.
Yeah. So you can check us out at our website, amnestyusa.org. You can go to the End Gun Violence page, get in contact with me. We have members across the country that are working on gun violence prevention work. Many state legislatures are getting ready to wrap up, but we still have time to do that. So please check us out, amnestyusa.org. And Ernest Coverson, I am the director of our gun violence prevention work and would love to work with any and everybody.
Well, Ernest, I want to let you know it's been great having you here. I think the conversation, we got to bring you back, and I pray that things get better. It's a shame that every time we turn on
Yes,
the TV, and we are that. We are TV ourselves. We're media. But we are far too often broadcasting the tragedies of young lives, of innocent lives, just at the hands of gun violence. And it's left in the hands of actually legislators. When I have to tell people, no, it's really in the hands of the people. If we really do a better job, our legislators will do a better job. But that's another show for another day.
Sir.
But thank you, my brother, for being with us. This is my 30-second soapbox, but now I appreciate having you. And certainly we'll have you back again.